gentlemen, boys and girls, basketball fans of all ages, we are back and better than ever. You are listening to Let's Talk NBA Podcast. On our show, we will cover all the hot topics in the association with special guests each week. So, without further ado, here is the voice of Let's Talk NBA Podcast, Alex Golden.
Hey everybody, what's going on? You are listening to the Let's Talk NBA Podcast. On today's show, though, it will be all Pacers as I join with Tyler Smith to recap the Pacers season. The Pacers were swept by the Cleveland Cavaliers, but they have a busy offseason ahead of them. What will they do with Paul George? Will Nate McMillan remain the coach? Larry Bird remain president of basketball operations? We're going to talk all things Pacers with Tyler Smith here on the Let's Talk NBA podcast. Hope you enjoy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining me right now is Tyler Smith. Tyler, what's going on, man?
Not too much. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good, man. I'm excited to talk about this podcast. Got a lot of interesting content to cover. How about you?
Yeah, man. It was an up and down season for the Pacers, but there is a ton to talk about, especially with the offseason approaching here.
Yes, there are a lot of looming questions, but before we get to that, let's go ahead and just kind of recap that series against the Cavaliers. Obviously, the epic collapse in Game 3, the should Paul George or C.J. Miles take the shot in Game 1, just a lot of conversation about this series. Even though it was a sweep, it still felt like the Pacers played very, very good basketball. What was your overall take from that series?
Well, to me, it really was what you'd expect from the series in terms of, I thought the Pacers would compete and be close in the games. By now, Pacer fans are pretty sick of losing to LeBron, especially with how close the games normally are. You mentioned all 4 games within 5 points. Everybody's going to remember the epic collapse in Game 3, but my big takeaway is that the Pacers just find ways to lose with the team, how it's constructed this year. I mean, if you look at the first 3 games, Paul George is going toe-to-toe with LeBron, but LeBron's teammates did more than Paul's. And then in Game 4, Paul's teammates play a great game, and Paul shoots 5 of 21. So, you can look at it in a few ways. It's disappointing to get swept. Game 1 was a huge blow, big chance that they had opportunity there. Or you can try to be somewhat positive and say, the Pacers were right there in every game with the defending champs, and maybe they're not all that far away from being a contender if the right moves are made.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what a lot of fans are believing in, that they're actually pretty close. But being a pessimistic, on the pessimistic side of things, the Cavaliers came from 25 points down and beat the Pacers, I think, by 6. And that was their biggest margin of victory, was Game 3, the game they were down the most. Do you think the Cavs were just kind of playing around with the Pacers and letting them get back into the game, or do you think the Pacers really were that competitive?
I think it's a little mix of both. I mean, anytime it's a defending champion team, like, they're thinking long-term, and they don't want to mess around too much in the first round. That's why LeBron has won so many games in a row in the first round. But I do think the Pacers do present a little bit tougher of a matchup for the Cavs. Paul George is obviously one of the better players, one of the better two-way players in the NBA, and he always, goes toe-to-toe with LeBron as far as stats go. Maybe not closing games, but as far as the stats. So that's a big part of it. I do think that, LeBron, I saw a stat that he played 42 minutes plus in every game, and the last time he did that was in the 2013 Eastern Conference Finals. So I don't think they intended in having LeBron play so much in the first round. But so the Pacers did give them a challenge in that regard.
Did the Pacers wait too long to remove Monte Ellis from the rotation as the starting shooting guard?
I would say definitely, definitely yes. There was some numbers to back that up. I was honestly surprised that he played in either Game 3 or 4. I thought the first 2 games kind of showed that he was, you have the opportunity in the playoffs to really limit your rotation, especially with the days off in between. And I think Indiana, they should have done that. I can't remember exactly what he was. He was a minus maybe 17 or 18 for the series. in limited playing time. And, of course, the Pacers were minus 16 in 4 games. So who knows if it would have been any different, but I was surprised that he was in there.
Yeah, I totally feel you there. I was really, once Glenn Robinson came back in Game 2, I really liked the way he played. I was expecting more of a Glenn Robinson, Lance Stevenson, and Kevin Seraphin as the 3-man rotation off the bench because Brooks and Ellis, number one, they're just too small, especially if LeBron's out there basically running point guard. And they're not good. Brooks is an okay shooter, right? But Ellis is a horrible shooter, and he just didn't fit out there. So we'll talk about Lance Stevenson. Obviously, he was the spark that got the Pacers into the playoffs. What did you think about his overall, performance the last 6 games of the season, and then in the playoffs against the Cavaliers?
Well, I thought it was great. I always have a lot to say about Lance Stevenson. Anybody who follows me on Twitter knows that I've been a huge believer in Lance as a Pacer. He just fits better here than anywhere else. He's comfortable. He's allowed to be himself. I was thrilled when he came back. I was kind of surprised because I thought that he would have been back by now if he was going to return, earlier this season. But like all season long, I kept tweeting pictures of Lance and saying things like, this team needs some heart. Who's got some heart with a picture of Lance on it. Another one was, this team needs rebounding. Who can rebound? Lance Stevenson. So, he obviously gives the Pacers a big spark. We saw it at the end of the year. I don't think they would have made the playoffs without him. I don't think they would have won every one of those games without, kind of the change of energy that he brought. As far as moving forward goes, it's going to be one of the, best contracts in the NBA, in my opinion. $4 million a year, especially in today's market, is going to be a huge bargain. One of two things is going to happen. He's either going to be the starting 2 next year, or I could see him, being the 6th man running the second unit. I think either way, it's going to be a bargain, and I think he's going to be happy with either way because he's going to play basically starter minutes. So,
yeah.
Think about it. The Pacers have a lot of decisions to make this offseason, but you could basically look at Lance Stevenson like he's already one big offseason acquisition for next year.
Why do you think it took, the front office so long to bring him in?
I think it was a mixture of things. Of course, we don't have all the answers. There was reports earlier this year that he was for sure coming back, and those were overblown. Larry just said that, he was waiting for the right time. And I think they were kind of, they maybe needed Rodney Stuckey's injury to happen to clear up the cap space to make it happen. I'm not really sure of the ins and outs, but maybe it was one of those things where they were like, well, we kind of want to, but we're not sure how it's going to work out. And then when they realized that they had kind of a lifeless team, they're like, all right, let's pull the trigger and make it happen now.
Yeah, I feel like they brought Lance back at the perfect time, and I talked to some of my my coworkers and some friends throughout the weeks about Lance Stevenson, and they're like, oh, they should have brought him back sooner. And to me, it's like, well, this team, if they bring him back in the middle of this season, yeah, he might have got him some wins then, but then again, all that energy goes earlier in the season, and then maybe they kind of, bottom out towards the end of the season and miss the playoffs. And that was just kind of my thinking. Maybe bringing him in with 5 must-win games to go would give them the momentum they needed heading into the playoffs. Unfortunately, Cleveland, they just kind of choked away a few of those games and ended up taking the number 2 seed because they don't really care. And I feel like if the Pacers would have played Boston in the first round, we'd still be playing right now.
Yeah, possibly Toronto as well. I mean, we could be having a completely different conversation today. And, a couple of those games that Cleveland choked away was to Atlanta. So if one of those games were different, the Pacers would be playing Toronto. And even if they wouldn't beat Toronto, I do think it would have been a deep series and maybe a whole different feel, kind of around the franchise right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think the Cavs are just so good. And I also feel like, and this is just my opinion, I feel like when the Pacers are playing the Cavs, they want to take it to them. But I don't know if they really believe that they could have. I don't really know if they believed in themselves so they could beat these Cavaliers. What do you think?
Yeah, I think maybe a few of them had that belief, that confidence. Paul was playing, out of his mind there the last few weeks, and I truly believe that he felt that it should have been a deep series. But it's just another thing. Like, there's so many close games in the playoffs that, you have a team that finds a way to win, or you have a team that finds a way to lose, and that's just how it is. And, this team this year wasn't ready for that, apparently.
Yeah, apparently they weren't. And how much can we put this blame on Nate McMillan? Is he to blame, or would you say that, the pieces that Larry Bird got from McMillan are the reason that we struggled so much? Or do you think the players themselves were the reason?
I'm going to go with all of the above. I think too often fans and the media, try to find one scapegoat. Right. They try to find one person to blame. There's been a lot of articles recently about Larry Bird from, Indianapolis sports media. But to me, I think there's plenty of blame to go around. Larry Bird has always been hit or miss with his decisions. I still think he's had, way more hits than misses. This past year I liked Jeff Teague and Thad Young moves. Hiring Nate McMillan does, to me, look like a mistake at this point. And, I wasn't even opposed to letting Frank Vogel go if the right coach was available. But according to the reports, Larry didn't even meet with anybody else. He was so dead set on McMillan that he just hired him. And my thing is, if you're going to be that dead set on a guy, he's got to produce. And to me, he didn't, reach the full potential. Just, the other day, McMillan said himself that, we're not a 500 team, but we played 500 basketball, to which many of my followers responded on Twitter by saying, because you're a 500 coach, which may be true. But, think about a couple things. The Pacers were horrible on the road, extremely inconsistent. And, you can argue the roster was flawed because, parts of it were flawed. But overall, McMillan didn't have a very good year, in my opinion. So, to me, this roster should have still been a comfortable 5 seed in the East. Maybe not higher than that. And, they were only a game away from being the 5, but I'm talking like comfortable 5, like not waiting till the end of the season to try to make the playoffs. They should have been comfortably in the 5 spot. So, chicken or the egg, Bird hired McMillan and did have a bit of a flawed roster, but I do think McMillan should have done more with what he was given, basically. So, and I do think the players deserve their fair share of the blame as well, Paul George included. I love Paul George. think he's the most talented player to ever put on that uniform, and he was incredible at the end of the year, but, wasn't having a great year by his standards before the end of the season. He did look kind of, checked out on some nights, and you can't always blame the coach for going, getting smoked by, Brooklyn and, Los Angeles, all these teams on the road. Like, you can't just blame a coach all the time for you not showing up as a player.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think it's all of the above. I wasn't opposed, like you said, to the Frank Vogel firing because I think Vogel's offense was very stagnant and it lacked a lot of, lacked a lot of movement, and I felt like it just needed to be changed offensively. Now, defensively, he was a great coach, but like I said, offensively, I was just not feeling it. And I had a feeling as soon as they fired him, I was like, they're going to hire McMillan. I just know they are. They're not going to go out and search for a coach. They're just going to settle with McMillan because he's already here and he's got experience as a head coach. It's just an easy hire. And sure enough, when I got that updated tweet, I was like, are you serious? Like, I was so annoyed with it. But I didn't want to write him off yet. I was like, okay, well, maybe he has adapted a little bit more since, the last time he was a head coach. And I wanted to see what he'd produce, but, like I felt when he first got hired, I was like, this is not a good hire. So I tried to convince myself that it'd be okay, but it wasn't. And the thing with Larry Bird is, I know I tweeted out later today that I was going to go on my rant here today on the podcast about why the Pacers should keep Larry Bird. I ended up posting a video about it, and that's on letstalknba.com where you can find that. And I basically just said in the video that with Larry Bird, you need to keep him here as the president of operations because Paul George trusts Larry Bird the most. And if there's anybody that's going to get this team, to where it needs to be a championship-level team, it's not going to be Kevin Pritchard. It's not going to be, Donnie Walsh. Donnie Walsh is just kind of hanging around just because he's got nothing else to do. And Larry Bird is the guy. And I think him and Paul's relationship is too valuable to just, throw him to the side. Now, like you said with the players, Paul George did not have a great season. He had a great last few months, but if he would have played like that at the beginning of the year, I feel like this team would have, started fighting a little bit harder. But with that being said, obviously the season's over, And now we have to figure out what direction this team is going to go. Like, Paul George is obviously, rumored to be going to L.A. every single day. You're going to see about 300 articles from L.A. media with, former Pacer player wants Paul George in Lakers. Just stupid clickbait stuff to try to get something out there to get their website some hits. But let's be honest. Right now, I feel like Paul's 50-50. What do you think?
Yeah, if I were to put a number on it, I would probably say something like 60-40 in terms of him being traded at some point. And, that may be a pretty scary number for a lot of Pacer fans to hear that want him to stay. But, compared to some other people and some other outlets, that's actually a pretty good percentage of staying. Like, I give him more of a chance to stay than a lot of people do. Mm-hmm. You asked about the direction, though. The first thing I would do, and we kind of touched on it, I personally would start with a new coach. That's the direction I would take right off the bat. And the fans that follow my work know that I'm not normally someone who just blames the coach for everything. I normally think coaches need time. He's only been here a year, but I just don't have much confidence in him being the guy to, take the Pacers to the deep playoff runs that they want. So I would bring in a new coach like yesterday. After that, if I'm Larry Bird, and this may be kind of against, I'm not really sure, maybe kind of against what Larry Bird, how he likes to operate, I would sit down with Paul George if I'm Larry Bird, and I would ask him straight up, what will it take to get you to sign here? Give Paul some input on the team, or maybe a coach if he wants a new coach. If Paul is dead set, when you have that conversation, if he is dead set on testing free agency, then you may be forced to move him. And maybe not this summer, but maybe you tell Paul, like, I'm going to try to prove to you that we can win, and I'll give you until the next trade deadline to sign, even though that would be a big distraction next year. I don't know if Larry Bird wants that, but I don't think Larry Bird is going to allow Paul to get to free agency. It's either going to be you sign an extension between now and February, or we have to trade you either this summer or February. So, and you can kind of tell, in that conversation, if Paul says, I want to see, that we can win, then maybe you wait until the trade deadline to see how it goes, but it all starts with him. And so one of the biggest questions for direction goes, like, will Larry Bird make moves this summer to try to keep Paul, or is he going to make moves to move on from Paul? Because those are two completely different things. And he needs to get it right, whatever he does. So a lot of pressure on Mr. Bird this year, and the fans are waiting. But I do wonder, I tweeted this the other day, I do wonder if Larry has considered something as an alternative, maybe throwing a bunch of money at Gordon Hayward, seeing if he can pry him away, sign him to prove to Paul that, he's serious. Maybe they can both play together for a year. Maybe that's enough to get Paul to stay. You probably can't do much else. Herb Simon maybe, can open up the checkbook a little bit, or try to sign a guy like Hayward, trade Paul George for the best package you can get, build around Hayward Turner and, the return of George. And, to me, that may be the only way to keep the fans and to stay away from a rebuild, because, Bird wants to avoid that. So that if it's up to me, I get a new coach. I go hard after Hayward. If you can't get Hayward, find some way possible to bring in shooting, rebounding, and some leadership type players, and hope you have enough to hold on to Paul and convince him to stay after that.
Well, you brought up a lot of interesting stuff right there, so I want to back up a little bit. A few questions I wanted to ask you. You said you wanted to get rid of McMillan. Is there anybody in mind that you have as a possible replacement for him?
I really don't, but I'll tell you this. At this point, even though you're trying to build an identity and, changing coaches every year is not the way to do it, but if I'm trying to do everything I can to keep Paul George, I don't think it would be worse to get a guy like Brian Shaw. I mean, I know he wasn't great in Denver, but Paul George loves him. Lance Stevenson loves him. Larry Bird loves him. I don't think you go downward by bringing him in. I just don't know. I don't know where Paul George stands on this. He's not going to, straight up say, like, I don't like my coach. So it's I don't know. That's why I would have that conversation, see where his head's at. Honestly, last year when Vogel was fired, I thought for sure Larry Bird was going to bring Kevin McHale here. I thought that was the obvious replacement. And then like 5 seconds later, Bird says, no, I wouldn't do that to him. I wouldn't be his boss. So
yeah, I've heard a lot of things about McHale not liking Bird too.
Yeah, and people say they're friends. It's actually probably the opposite. They probably don't get along. But that was, somebody like that had some good offenses and, as respect to the players. I thought somebody like that, I don't really have an opinion on a Mark Jackson type. I know a lot of people say there's not much defense there, but, it's just kind of I haven't done a whole lot of thought into who would be the replacement. I just think at this point, you're looking at a 500 type coach possibly with McMillan, and they want to go deeper.
Yeah, no, I know a lot of people were hinting at Mike D'Antoni, and you look at what Mike D'Antoni did with the Rockets. I think that with the way Bird wants to play, that getting a coach that kind of fits that style might be smart. But we saw like the Pacers really struggled to run that kind of offense earlier in the season because they were, giving up so much defensively that McMillan basically just went to a half-court offense. And I kind of feel like that's why, Monte really didn't, play well. And also last year when they brought in Monte, they paired him with George Hill, who is a defensive-minded, three-point shooting point guard. And then you bring a Jeff Teague in. Well, he's not a great three-point shooter. He's not known for his defense. He's known for his ability to create and dish off. So I feel like that kind of, screwed up the whole Monte Ellis experiment was because who he was playing with. And you look back in the summer, there were so many rumors about the Pacers wanting to go after Rudy Gay, but they didn't want to give up Ellis. They only wanted to give up Stuckey. Well, I feel like every single Pacers fan right now wishes they would have gave up Monte Ellis for Rudy Gay. I know Rudy Gay got injured in that Pacers game, but having a player like that alongside with Paul George in the starting lineup would have been so much better for this team. And I mean, when you're looking at coaches, I mean, there's not a great list out there of coaches that I would love to have. I mean, a small list. I'm a fan of Doug Collins, but I think he's a little too old. I think you hit the nail on the head with your Brian Shaw prediction. I feel like Brian Shaw would be the most likely candidate for this job because of his relationship with Paul. And I think this whole summer is about keeping Paul George here. I feel like Larry Bird is going to go all out this summer to try to persuade Paul to stay a Pacer. What is your do you really believe that Gordon Hayward is going to leave the Utah Jazz? Because I don't see that happening.
Man, I don't know. I know he loves it there. He's found success there. I think they're going to offer him a ton of money. And it's very possible that if he doesn't go there, that, Boston is his desired destination. I've been talking with some fans on Twitter about, if Hayward had the choice, if he did leave Utah, assuming money was the same, would he choose his old coach or would he choose his hometown? Because I think there would be a lot of intrigue there. I mean, there's been a lot more talk of, him going to Boston than Indiana, but of course, that's probably people assuming that Paul George is still here and not sure if they have them. If the money and everything like that, but there's a lot, and a lot of times in the off season, there guys become available that you aren't even talking about beforehand. So it's all about fit. You mentioned how Monte and Jeff not really a good fit together, and Jeff Teague had a good season, and he could be even better if he had a bigger shooter type in the shooting guard position, more shooters surrounding him. He could be a double-double guy every night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I honestly thought him and Lance Stevenson played great together in the playoffs. I prefer Lance coming off the bench just because of his energy. I think it really helps the team. Now, he can play 30 minutes. It doesn't mean he only has to play 20, 25 minutes because he's a bench guy. But I think him and Jeff Teague played well enough this year that you can bring Teague back and be okay with Lance as your starting shooting guard if that's what worst comes to worst. Now, I'm just throwing this out there, but there are a couple big-name power forwards that are free agents this year. You got Paul Millsap, Blake Griffin, Serge Ibaka. What do you think about one of those three guys possibly joining with us?
I would absolutely be in the market if I'm Larry Bird for a good big, and you got some flexibility. You could if it ends up being a power forward or a center, you can move Miles Turner to the other spot if it fits better. He's flexible in that regard. And I think a guy like Thaddeus Young, could be a really good guy off the bench. And And I've thought about it before. Thad Young, I think, could possibly even play some 3 off the bench if you really need him to. He can be flexible, especially who he can guard. So if he's coming off the bench as the main backup 4, but also get some backup 3 minutes to, get his minutes up there a little bit, that's a possibility as well. But, if I'm Bird, I'm looking for the things I mentioned earlier, shooting, rebounding, leadership, toughness, somebody to show Paul that, hey, we went out and got this guy who's either an all-star or borderline all-star, has a good reputation, and tell Paul, let's go.
Yeah, and the one thing fans have to understand is with Paul being a free agent next year, that might scare other big names from wanting to sign here long term. So I feel like the best way to go after a guy is offer him big money, kind of like Kevin Durant did last year with the Warriors, sign a 1-and-1. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, money talks, and the one thing about the Pacers that they do have going for them is they do have, a future star in Miles Turner here. There's not a whole lot of free agents that, as far as the really big names that want to go to Indiana compared to a bigger market, but some of those names you mentioned, you think back to when David West came here and changed the game for the Pacers. There is some intrigue. They may not look at it as, well, Paul's going to leave and the team's going to be horrible. They could look at it as, Miles Turner's there. Maybe if Jeff Teague resigns, they have some good pieces. And, of course, like you mentioned, if there's a huge offer on the table, it's tough for guys to turn that down.
And I think the Pacers do kind of have something going for them if Paul decides to leave. Now, I'm not saying this guy is the next coming of this player, but I think Glenn Robinson has the ability to, he kind of reminds me of Danny Granger a little bit more athletic, not as good of a shooter, but he kind of has a similar game. And I feel like, they've got him on a bargain deal right now. So if Paul decides to leave, I mean, I'm not saying that's going to make him a great team, but I would be okay with Glenn Robinson getting a little bit more playing time if the Pacers have to go into a rebuild mode. But I don't feel like we're at that point yet. I feel like what you said at the very beginning of all this topic specifically was what's going to happen. They're going to try to go out this summer. They're going to try to bust their butts to prove to Paul that this is where he should stay. And if he's not feeling it, if they're struggling come trade deadline and he's just not feeling it, they'll look to trade him. But they're not just going to trade him, in my opinion. I don't think they're just going to give him up at the trade deadline unless they get something that they really want. Because, teams after the trade deadline can really have a good push once there's no pressure for Paul to be worried about whether he's leaving or staying. Use that last 3 months to really focus his game heading into the playoffs, and then kind of just see what happens in the playoffs. Because, in my opinion, I just don't think Bird's going to trade him unless it is, something he really, really likes. And he's got to bet on himself to be able to keep Paul here. So while you're 60-40 Paul leaving, I'm probably, right about the same, but I don't think I don't think he'll be traded. That's just my opinion. So anyway, with looking forward, though, the Pacers do have 4 free agents this offseason. We've got Jeff Teague, Aaron Brooks, Lavoy Allen with a team option, and then C.J. Miles with a player option. Out of those 4, how many of them remain Pacers?
Well, I could be dead wrong on this, but I really believe that Jeff Teague is going to come back. And the thing is, he may get some crazy offer from another team that the Pacers won't match, and he could take that. But, he strikes me as a guy who is comfortable here, likes being home, around family, playing for the team he grew up rooting for. And to me, as long as Bird has, a solid offer and something in the ballpark of what he's looking for, I think he takes it. I'm not sure he even goes and meets with other teams as much. So he posted that on Instagram today, and, some fans were freaking out about it, but I was encouraged. I'm trying to remember exactly his hashtag. Do you remember what it said?
I think it said "Stay tuned." I'm gonna go check real quick. It said,
"Stay tuned."
More to come. Yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah, more to come. And so that last hashtag he used actually gave me more thought of that's him saying that I want to be here and I'm going to stay. So I think he'll be back. I don't think Brooks will be back. C.J. Miles is the tough one, and this is crazy that so many of us even fans and media alike, we didn't really know that he had an opt-out. We didn't really talk about it, that he had an opt-out. We just kind of assumed that Miles was going to be back. But the way he's talking, he mentioned he's not young anymore. And, with a lot of teams needing shooters, he's probably going to get more than the $5.6 million or whatever it is on his contract for a year. So if they want to bring him back, which I do think they want him on the team, they're going to have to pay more money. So that's, I would kind of go maybe 50-50 on CJ. And then Lavoie, I think it all depends on some other things that they're looking at. I mean, he's done a fine job. He's not a great piece by any stretch of the imagination, but, he's there if they want him, and I'm just not sure how they're feeling on that front.
Yeah, I kind of feel like with the addition of Kevin Seraphin, Lavoie's gone. I don't think they want to waste $3 million on him, because that $3 million could be used to maybe sign another Lance Stevenson later in the year. Like you said with CJ, I kind of feel like with Kyle Korver and JJ Redick being free agents, if a team were to miss out on one of those guys they're going after, that they could, throw a bunch of money at CJ. Someone kind of like the Pelicans, who don't really have a lot of shooting. But if you had CJ out there as a starting shooting guard next to Drew Holiday and the two big men, I think that, really would help spread the floor for them. So I'm not really sure CJ will be back. I feel like out of those four, only one feels like a guaranteed lock-in, and that's Teague. But at the same time, like you said, if somebody offers him a lot more money and the Pacers aren't willing to go over a certain amount of money that he wants, then, it could be a slim pickings, and we might be looking at a Lance Stevenson starting point guard possibly for the Pacers. So what would you think about that, Lance starting point guard?
I wouldn't want it. I mean, I love the guy, but I would not want him, for 82 games. He pounds the ball too much to be in that spot. It's one thing to do some point guard, off the bench, but I really like Teague's game, and I think his weaknesses won't be so big, when you have a better, shooting guard in there with him. So really hoping that Teague comes back. I think he will, but you really never know.
Right. Okay, so Pacers, I believe, have the 18th pick in the draft. Not a very sexy, spot to be in. Are they going to end up making that draft pick, or do you think they're going to package that in a deal possibly with Al Jefferson and Monte Ellis?
It's another tough one. I think the pick gets traded. Usually when Bird's not in the top, like 13 or so, he's looks to deal the pick often. It's possible that the Pacers make some moves to even get a higher pick, but I could see them trying to package this, trying to get a shooter or a big that can rebound or something, some kind of veteran presence. The thing is, they don't have a ton of assets to make upgrades. So one of their only assets is possibly this pick, and so that's why my gut tells me they'll move it. At the same time, there are some intriguing names, around that time of the draft that could be available, and Bird might decide that that's the better bet. One thing we haven't talked about much yet is just how important all of the the news surrounding the All-NBA team and the draft lottery in terms of if they do try to trade Paul to somebody, where are they in the pick? And there's so many things that have to fall into place before we get real answers to this. It's all speculation leading up to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I feel like if they're gonna want to get rid of Monte Ellis or Al Jefferson, they're either gonna have to package this year's pick or next year's pick, or even a pick after that if Paul George leaves. I think that pick, the 2019 pick, might be very attractive to people, and so that might be a way to get rid of Al or Monte. And I feel like at this point, sometimes the Pacers and the Pacers fans need to realize that drafting a rookie at 18, if there's a good player there at that point, getting him on that rookie contract is huge, because right now we kind of control Miles Turner for the next two seasons. And then after that, he'll be a restricted free agent. So for 9 seasons, basically, we can kind of control what Miles Turner does. And I think that's, that's very important, because if you get somebody, I'm not going to say any names because I'm sure there's a lot of fans out there that don't want certain players, but if there's a guy out there that you like and and you don't feel like, trading Monte away just to be a salary dump-off is smart, and you want to draft this player, then you just draft that player and deal with Monte and Al's contracts later. I feel like Monte might be easier to move because after next season it's a player option, and so, him and Al make roughly $10 to $12 million each next year and the year after. So it's not like they're like huge contracts, but obviously that's $20 million that you're keeping up on your cap. And if the Pacers are able to unload that, that'll give them $53 million in the offseason this year. So I feel like with this offseason being all about Paul George, they're going to try to move those pieces. And I'm not sure how it gets done. It's obviously easier said than done. But with those two guys, I feel like their time here in Indiana is up. Do you think that they'll be too hard to trade?
I think it's going to be tough to get rid of both. If I were guessing, I would say that Bird will find a way to get rid of one, and I'm not sure which one it'll be. I think if the fans had to choose, they would more likely get rid of Monte, and Al is probably more of a presence in the locker room, and in certain styles he can still post up with the best of them. So.
Right.
If they could choose, that would be the one. I think it's going to be difficult to get rid of both, but I know Larry's going to try. He's going to be dead set on, trying to get rid of them and acknowledging that they may have not been the best signings, the best fit for, the style he was trying to accomplish. But as far as the pick goes, again, like a big part of this has to do with what direction are they going? Are they going into this offseason thinking we need to get younger, we need to start building around Turner and whatever else we have? If that's the case, then maybe you really are dead set on making a pick for a young guy. But if you're trying to win right off the bat this next year, how many rookies that are picked 18th are, really good right away? Usually at that point it takes a couple years. I mean, even Miles Turner, turning 21, had some ups and downs, even though I think you and I both believe he's a stud moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to bring in a younger guy and at 18th pick and think that he's going to move the needle right off the bat for you.
Well, I'm glad you brought Miles Turner up because he was a topic of discussion all year long. During the off season, I think fans in the Pacers front office set the bar a little bit too high for him. They expected him to be this, all-star level player next to Paul George and, take this team to a top 3 seed. And I was one of those players, one of those guys. I believed in Miles Turner, and I thought that last year we just saw the beginning of how good he was going to be. And now that he was going to be the starting center, I was like, oh, he's going to stretch Biggs out. He's going to be a great force. And then, we saw that sophomore slump. And I feel like with all these games added to his schedule, because he didn't play all 82, he played about half that last year. I feel like with all those games added on to him, the pressure of being the number 2 guy with Paul, it was just a lot for him. And he struggled down the stretch, especially in the playoffs, did not put up very good numbers. Had a great game 4, but that was the only good game he had. Can you review the type of season Miles Turner had for us?
I think overall, when you put in context his age and experience, overall he had a really good year. And maybe not as good as what, like you said, some fans expected, but he just turned 21, did some really good things. And, if you look at Pacer history, Miles Turner is either first or second in like 10 different stats before turning 21. Like he's first in points, first in rebounds, first in blocks, among other things before turning 21. So he did have ups and downs, but that's to be expected. People talk about Frank Vogel and George Hill being gone, but man, they really miss Jan Mahinmi. Mm-hmm. And Mahinmi's presence not only on the defensive end, but in the locker room, a guy that could have helped Turner. Instead of, hey, Turner, you're 20 going on 21, and we're going to have you guarding all these guys and taking a lot of shots and, putting all this pressure on you. Whereas if a guy like Mahinmi was still here, they could work together and, it would probably not expose as many weaknesses in his game. But I think he's right where the Pacers want him to be at this age. I mean, we could still be 3 or 4 years away from him even entering his prime. So, 21, just think about how good he has played at that age the sky's the limit, and I think, the playoff experience is going to help him, and I expect probably next year or maybe the year after to make a really, really big jump.
Miles comes across as the kind of guy that, really wants to do well. He wants to win, and he wants to improve his game. And so I feel like with this learning experience, he's only going to come back stronger. He's only going to come back better. And with the guy at the top of the chain, Herb Simon and Larry Bird really believing in him, he's got the room to grow, and he doesn't have to feel pressure. What do you think about him in the offseason possibly working out with Jermaine O'Neal? Will that be a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, I love it. I mean, Jermaine is, if I were to think about Pacer history in terms of, all the years growing up watching him, for me it's Reggie Miller and then it's Jermaine O'Neal. Like, to me, that's how high I put him in terms of, Pacer fandom for people. And, I think he could teach him a lot. His willingness to, he knows what it means to be a Pacer. He knows what it means to, have pressure on you as a young player. And, imagine if Miles were to get some of Jermaine's back to the basket moves in addition to his, shooting, pick and pop and all that. I mean, can't go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I kind of heard people joke about it because, Jermaine was hurt all the time, and some people want to call him soft, but, I think it'd be good for him, and I think Jermaine really just wants to see him do well, especially representing the blue and gold. Jermaine still loves Indianapolis, and I just feel like Indiana will benefit from them working together, and, as we're about to wrap this podcast up, I want your, full opinion on what you think will happen. Not like, well, this could happen. I want what you exactly think will happen this offseason and then going forward with Paul George.
Well, again, it all starts with Paul, and I know it's there's a lot of different opinions about it. I just don't, my gut tells me that Larry Bird is not going to let him get to free agency, and he's going to try whatever he can do to get him to stay. But if he gives him any clue that, I want to test free agency, I think Bird is going to be really, really tempted to trade him. With that said, though, I don't think he's going to get traded this summer. I think if it happens, even though it would be a distraction, I think it would be next season at some point. The really hard thing to think about is, what if he isn't signed, but the Pacers are having a good year next year? Mm-hmm. That's when it gets really difficult, because then that situation may come up, like you said, that you just want to give your all and hope that another Kevin Durant situation doesn't happen, even if it became likely at that point. But man, this is hard. There's so many different scenarios that can happen. The obvious thing is that this is possibly the most important and most interesting Pacers offseason in a really, really long time. I mean, you're talking, this team could be a few good moves away from being really good, or a few moves away from rebuilding. I mean, that is how important this offseason probably is. But if I were giving predictions, and it's really difficult, I'm going to say that Paul George is here. I'm going to say Jeff Teague is here. I'm going to say the pick is traded. And I'm going to say Larry makes a flurry of moves, including trying to get one big name of some sort, and then try to surround the team with some shooters and at least one or two rebounders in there. And I think, the fans will be excited going into next year, even though there could be some uncertainty with Paul. But I think it's a team that, if the right moves are made this offseason, we're looking at a team that could be dangerous and could be a top 4 seed next year if everything goes well.
Is Nate McMillan the head coach of this team?
Well, according to, what we found out today, I'm guessing yes, because it's rare. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's rare for, a coach to give a press conference after the season, 4 days later, and then not be retained. And Larry Bird's going to talk the following Monday. Last year, it was 4 days after they were eliminated, he let Frank Vogel go. And so this year, by the time Bird talks, it'll be 8 days after. And the fact that McMillan's having a presser first probably means that he is going to come back But you really never know. Maybe Bird's just taking his time trying to make that decision. But if I'm guessing at this point, even though I'd prefer him not to be, I'm guessing that he is back.
Well, good stuff, man. I was just thinking about this, and I know that we're wrapping up here, but just kind of like a bonus thing, kind of get everybody's minds off Paul leaving, because I know that's depressing. How awesome would it be for the Pacers to win that 2021 bid for the All-Star game?
That'd be great. I mean, Indianapolis is a really good sports city. They do everything well. I mean, I think the Final Four should be there every year. Kind of like, like the College World Series is in one place always. The Final Four should be in Indianapolis. They put on an incredible Super Bowl. It's definitely, the very least, it's a top 3 or top 5 NBA arena. It's just a beautiful facility, great workers, great people. Downtown is, nice for visitors. Everything's close. So I think that'd be a great thing. Anytime you can see Larry Bird, driving an Indy car, that's worth it.
Yeah, I think it'd be a lot of fun, and I think I would be saving up some money so I could make sure I got down there to enjoy those festivities, because how cool would it be to have that here? And you never know what All-Stars the Pacers might have at that point. So only one that I can predict right now is possibly Miles Turner, but we'll see going forward, right?
Yep.
So, all right, Tyler, I appreciate you coming on. If you want to just let everybody know where they can find you out on Twitter and what you have coming out for us, that'd be great.
Yeah, you can find me at Tyler Smith _ISL. ISL stands for Indy Sports Legends, and that's where I write for covering the Pacers and IU basketball for IndySportsLegends.com and the Sports Exchange.
So there you guys have it. Make sure you follow Tyler on Twitter and get all of his information so you guys can check out his content. And I really enjoyed having you on today, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
All right, we'll talk to you later.